Thank you for the opportunity to be here. And before the questions come up, yes, I do have a couple of slides at the end of what we've been doing on the spot market program and some of the conversations we've had in D.C. I'll cover that at the end and maybe lead into some questions here. So for those of you who know me, I'm sorry. For those of you who don't know me, let me give a brief background. I grew up in southeast Iowa on a hog farm and then attended Iowa State, where much to my father's chagrin, I got a degree in political science. And from there, went and worked political campaigns around the country. And from there, in 2009, after losing a couple of campaigns, I decided to do something different. The NPPC hired me to work on grassroots organizations. So I met and worked with several of you as we tried to get you out to D.C. and around the country to lobby on behalf of the industry as a whole. From there, went and was Jennifer's counterpart in Ohio for about 5 years, and then went to work for the National Pork Board for the last 2 years with Bill Leven. So been around the block a couple of times. But really back, and no offense to my good friends at the Checkoff, my former employer, Bill, but politics is kind of where I belong. It's kind of what I enjoy. For those of you who know me, I can see you all chuckling. This is kind of what I live for. So going to jump into some issues here. But before we really dive into the issues, I do want to just give you some really quick background and set the stage of what we're dealing with in Washington, D.C., right? This isn't about, this has nothing to do with partisan. It's understanding the chessboard that we're playing in. It's understanding what are the dynamics at play as we talk about asking for additional funding for the spot market program, or we look at trade. We have to understand the political pressures that are on our congressmen, our senators, but then also within the administration. This is President Biden's approval rating. I haven't updated this slide in a couple of weeks because, candidly, it really hasn't changed much. The concept is still the same. As we watch what's happening in Ukraine and with Russia, it continues to escalate down. But we're looking at an administration that has a fairly low approval rating. And there's a lot of things that factor into this, but that shifts how they are going to respond to things that we're asking for as we approach the midterm elections. As we approach the midterm elections, you all know that a third of the Senate is up every 2 years, but we have 1 year where there's 34 seats up. This is the year. Sorry, my slide's a little off the bottom there with Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. But you can see here that we have more Republican seats up than Democrat seats, but we also have more retirements on the Republican side. All factors into what we're dealing with here as what they're willing to take up and not willing to take up. And as we break that down and we start to look at the Senate map here and what's going to happen, we start to look at the map and where the toss-ups are. And as you look at the center here, this is not mine. My map is a little bit different the way I read it, but as we look at this and we look at those toss-up seats right there in the center, and we look at those leans on both sides, again, for all those folks, there's going to be some pressures on them on what they're willing to take up and not willing to take up. Not going to get into the partisan side of it, but understand the chessboard and what we're dealing with here as we start to talk about these issues. Before we talk about federal issues, I do want to give you a couple of quick updates. Massachusetts passed question 3 several years ago. And we were successful in getting them to delay implementation of that until August 15th of 2022. For those who aren't aware, you've all heard of Prop 12, which we'll talk about in just a second. Similar to that, different, but a lot of similarities in that. We were successful in not only getting it switched, getting the date delayed, but we were also successful in getting it moved over to the Department of Agriculture, which has a better understanding of how to implement this rule and the importance of making sure that they continue to get supply. One of the reasons they were willing to do this, and it passed almost unanimously when we pushed for it, was because of Proposition 12 and the chaos that we're seeing in California. Now, we've got a tale of two courts here, right? First, I'm going to talk about the Supreme Court, then I want to talk about the Superior Court in Sacramento County. Now, fresh out this morning, Supreme Court, just quick background, we petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court to hear a case on the Dormant Commerce Clause as it relates to Proposition 12. We were hopeful at the beginning of the year they were going to pick up this petition, hear our case, remand it either back to the district court or rule on it overall, and we were going to be off to the races. Folks, they have relisted our case time and time again. As of this morning, about 9:30, so about 30 minutes ago, they just put out their list of the cases that they're going to hear and the cases that they denied. We weren't on that list. So fresh off the press, we're getting relit, more than likely getting relisted. There's a potential that they deny us on Friday. There is a possibility of that. Folks, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Every time they kick the can down the road, every time they relist us, it does lessen our chances of this case getting picked up. Now, I want to talk about that when we start talking about what does that mean. But let's talk about the Superior Court decision here. So the Superior Court there was a lawsuit filed by the Food Equity Alliance. The Food Equity Alliance is a group of folks in California, retailers and food service folks. NPPC is not a party to that case, not a party to that case. But it is a group of folks that are going to be impacted by the implementation of Proposition 12. They filed suit, and with the Sacramento County Superior Court, the judge reviewed the case, reviewed all the information, and has put a 180-day delay on the implementation once the rules are finalized. Okay, so not 180 days from when you rule, but 180 days from when final rules are in place. So that's a good thing. Now, again, fresh off the press, state of California has appealed that. Not completely unheard of, but they did appeal that on Friday, and so we're going to see some action on that too. So I bring both of these things up. There's progress being made. The fact that we made it to the U.S. Supreme Court and got our petition, at least not denied right away, is successful. The fact they haven't denied it yet is still a good sign, but it would have been a whole lot better if they had picked it up right out of the gate and taken it. I will tell you on the Supreme Court case, though, several folks who follow the Supreme Court, follow constitutional law, have called this a blockbuster case. They have referred to our case with Farm Bureau as a case to watch because, candidly, if they choose not to rule and define the Dormant Commerce Clause or the Interstate Commerce Clauses, they're essentially saying they're no longer valid. I want to repeat that. If the United States Supreme Court chooses not to take up a case to define the Dormant Commerce Clause, they're essentially saying it is a dead letter. Okay? And what does that mean for us as an industry? That means we better get ready to go state by state. Okay? These are states where there's already language introduced on gestation stalls or other things. We're looking at the blue states or California and Massachusetts, but we also know about discussions and language in these other states where there's going to be similar types of language or pause acts or other things. And NPPC is prepared to take your investment in SIP dollars and get into those states and become active. Here at the end of March, we've got meetings set up in a couple of states here to start having conversation with folks on the ground about how to get organized and get effective there. But moving on to some federal policy stuff, African swine fever is never far from our minds. Obviously, the 50 million funds, 500 million funds in CCC were there for prevention. That's a big win. It's never been done before to work on eradication and control efforts on a disease that has not technically hit U.S. soil. Has not hit U.S. soil, excuse me. That's a big win for us. That's a testament to USDA's understanding of the threat that ASF brings to our country. That is a big deal and a big win for us. But we're not done, obviously, as we continue to work on this, and a lot of this is done hand in hand with our partners over at National Pork Board and then with our friends here in the State Association. ASF is one that everybody is on the same page on and working on. Between the NPPC and National Pork Board and the state associations, we have an ASF working group that continues to reevaluate what are we working on, what are the priorities, what steps do we need to take to make sure we keep it out, but then are also prepared for when it comes in. And it comes down to things like increased depopulation capacity, expanded capacity at the NOLMS labs, ASF surveillance in Central America, which we'll talk about here in a little bit as it relates to Panama, increased trainings related to FADs, and that's where we're focusing our funding efforts, and I know that's where National Pork Board is funding their efforts, or focusing their efforts on research and development and education. What does that look like on a funding request? You can see here, but a couple of quick highlights. We continue to request additional congressional funding. You all know that this Congress is 5 months into a budget year and hasn't passed a budget yet. They keep kicking the can down the road, and so we're continuing to have those conversations and push for $20 million in APHIS veterinary staff services, $25 million for additional euthanasia equipment, $30 million for full NOLMS lab funding. Now, we're not going to get all that, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you we're going to get all that, but we continue to push and explain the importance to Congress about the need for it, and then for CBP, 96.7 for additional ag inspectors, $5 million for FAD passenger awareness. Moving on, the essence of time, I want to talk a little bit about competition here. You've heard the Secretary Vilsack and even the President talk about concentration within the industry, and so competition continues to be an issue. And it comes down on a number of things, including line speeds here. All of you are familiar with what we went through in 2020 as they adjusted the line speed. You see here, USDA recently announced that they're going to allow some pork packing plants to run at a faster speed. We continue to work through that with USDA and with OSHA, and we've run into some challenges there, which we can talk about if folks have questions. As we talk about competition, obviously you've heard about the announcements for small and medium packers and the opportunities available there, loans available for guarantees as well as capital. They're making funds available for folks to grow in some of the packing areas. But one of the things we're really watching and kind of keeping our powder dry for is on the competition issues as it relates to Packers and Stockyards Act. We've run into this before. Back in 2010, when we had an issue with GIPSA, there were a number of rules that were introduced that candidly would have been incredibly detrimental to this industry, and we're continuing to watch for this. You'll notice, though, that you don't hear us out in the media a lot. We're not pounding the pavement on this and hitting back every time the administration says something. And candidly, it's because we're waiting to see what the rules are. We don't know what they are yet. We know that the poultry rule has been sent over to OMB. They're moving forward on that. But we're going to continue to watch for this. And when the rules come out proposed, it'll be just like it is with every other rule, where we'll have an opportunity to evaluate it, have the economists do an economic impact study, understand what it's going to mean for the industry, really dive into it. And then there will be an opportunity for a comment period. And we'll organize our comments with folks in the room, our state partners, and make sure that we're scientifically pushing back if there are challenges, or candidly, it may be good for the industry. We don't know. And so if it is, we want to make sure we're supportive of the changes that are out there. And so we're going to continue to watch for this. The rules are not out yet, folks. The poultry rule is at OMB. We haven't seen it yet. But as that continues to come out, we're going to continue to work through it. Livestock mandatory reporting, LMR extended until March 11th. It's part of the budget package as they continue to extend funding here. Obviously, we've testified on this a couple of times. We've been very active on this. We continue to have meetings on the Hill about it. There's not a lot of issues on our side. It does come down to some opposition with Senator Grassley and some of the things he's working on, as well as a few other senators. Folks, we're continuing to push on it. There's just some bigger politics, as we talked about at the chessboard earlier. There's just some bigger politics at play here. We're going to have to continue to work through and continue to have those conversations about the livestock mandatory reporting. Trade. So before I get into trade, though, I want to tell you, there's not a lot happening in trade right now for the entire country and a lot of different industries. I got an interesting email a couple of weeks ago from an individual in D.C., and I'll leave out the expletives, but it was a whole lot of how is the U.S. pork industry continuing to make progress on trade? Nothing is happening on trade. Nothing's happening on trade. How are you guys getting India and Nigeria and other things done? And candidly, it's because of the work that you all have been doing and helping to set up with our shop in D.C. for the last 20 years, right? These things aren't just happening. They didn't just wake up one day and be like, oh, we're going to go ahead and open up access to India and Nigeria. It's because of the legwork of you folks going to D.C., being engaged, funding through SIP to ensure that we had the approach and the long-term view of getting these areas open. Talk about the Philippines. A lot of things happening here. Obviously, the reduction of the MAVs and the quotas and tariffs have allowed us to have some increased access there. You see here, and I just updated these with the reports that came out, but with the expanded market access, we've increased 178%, $204 million last year into the Philippines because of that increased access. Vietnam, most favored nation. This is, you guys have seen this before. It was last year. It was in July 22. It was announced earlier this year, 15% to 10% on imported frozen pork. That came about because we organized a letter, put some pressure on folks, and then obviously we're continuing to watch. Several of us were on a call with Ambassador Tai about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. While that's not about market access, it is about SPS issues and our ability to get more engaged there and help drive that message home. India, a lot of folks ask about India and say, okay, what's the big deal with India? They're not a large pork consumption country. Well, folks, there are roughly 33 million Christians in India. It is a large tourism destination. 33 million people, to give you an idea, would be somewhere between the state of California and the state of Texas, right? And so there's real opportunity there. But getting access to this market for all pork and pork products for export and acceptable FSIS standard certificates, that's a big deal for us. That sets the groundwork for folks at National Pork Board and USMEF to get in there and start marketing U.S. pork as an opportunity. And while it may not be China, it may not be in the entire EU, there is an opportunity here as we continue to diversify our export markets and look long term. Same thing with Nigeria. It's the only meat product from the U.S. to have access is export sausage and other similarly processed meats. Again, we're looking at 191 million people, average per capita income of $5,600. Not huge, but it is a nation that is growing and becoming more wealthy. And as they do that, having access to U.S. product will be key for us as well as for them. Again, our job at NPPC is to open the door, to work through all the issues of trade, to make sure we can have access to market. Then our friends over at Pork Board and USMEF get in there and start marketing that product to make sure we continue to have access to those markets. As we've worked on these things, though, we have not forgotten about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is China, and the tariffs we face there with 25% extra because of 232 and everything else going on there. We continue to have those conversations. You saw some of our notices yesterday. We continue to talk about the need for those tariffs to be reduced and continue to put pressure on Catherine Tai as she works through those issues on phase one and continues to pressure China. CPTPP, we're going to continue to work on it. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's not likely to happen, especially this year in an election year. We all know there's supply chain issues. We continue to work through this and continue to have these conversations. Obviously, there's been some legislation passed as it goes into conference committee. We're continuing to be in those conversations with our friends and make sure that our views and we continue to push on getting those ports opened up. Essence of time, I'm going to cover a couple of quick things just here for your awareness. As we talk about accusations of concentration within the meat industry, one of the things that we had done was a concentration study, really high level. We put out some statements about this. Top 4 companies control 64% of packing capacity. That is 7% less than it was in 2016. As of 2017 economic census, meat packing was not among the top most 100 concentrated industries. And when you compare wholesale prices in a number of global markets, we're very competitive there. We're not the cheapest, but we're certainly not the most expensive. And so all of this points to that some of the accusations that are being made out there, there's an opportunity to have some real dialogue about what's really happening within our industry. Not to say there's not challenges, but we need to make sure we're on a level set about what we're talking about here. All right, so spot market program. I'm going to skip over this first slide because we've pretty well covered that. A couple of things. A few weeks ago, we were given the opportunity to go in and meet with FSA. And first off, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who is an investor and contacted our office about the concerns and frustrations over the program. We kept notes on all of those. And so when the opportunity to meet with FSA came up, we had all those things documented. We had everything ready to go. We showed up. You can see what we talked about there on the program. And we started to discuss what was going on in the countryside, what the challenges were, and help really work through it. Our goal here is not to beat our friends at FSA over the head with anything. It's to help them better understand the industry. It's to help them better understand the challenges that we faced in 2020 and where the opportunities to improve this program are and how we can move through it. You can see what our asks there were to the application period to be extended, to your question earlier, I think, Jason, and that they be allowed to modify previous applications to your point there, Kurt. We did ask for additional funding because that's what we do. We're lobbyists on your side. We're not going to show up and not make a couple of more asks. That remains to be seen. And to the point earlier about there's rules and processes has to go through, we're continuing to have those conversations. I was texting with our folks in the back now just to see where we were, and that remains to be seen if there's going to be additional funding there. So we've taken these same concerns to the folks at USDA. We continue to, or at FSA, we continue to have these conversations, and I think to several of the points that were made here, we've had those conversations. Now it's about having the dialogue with our friends over at FSA to make progress on what does that mean. So with that, I think I hit the 20 minutes, but I've got time for questions unless Alan would like to shepherd hook me off. So.
No, you're good. Any questions for Bryan?
If there's no questions, that just means that NPPC is continuing to do everything right, and that I'll get a rave review afterwards. So thank you all for your continued support. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bryan, for your comments and continued dedication to our industry.